Hello, everyone. This one's a bit spontaneous. I haven't prepared at all for it. Well, most of my videos I don't because I feel the spontaneity gives more honesty. Not that I wouldn't be honest, but just when it just flows freely. There's no chance of self-censoring. It's just it's what's on my mind. So I think that's the best way to upload videos most of the time. Obviously, if I'm talking about news reports, I'll put links and so on. Um, I want to just talk a bit about centrism, because after all, it is in the channel's name, Centrist Philosopher. And at this time, when I'm going to be reviewing my channel one of these days, I keep saying that, I keep getting busy, but it does seem an appropriate time to talk a bit about it. Firstly, about my username, Centrist Philosopher. Um, the philosopher bit, honestly, is just a bit tongue in cheek. It's not meant to be, it's a bit fun, right? I don't see myself as a philosopher. I just think it's different, you know? Um, so it's just that's what it is. It's just sort of for fun. It sounds good. I like the word. It's like the word. I think it sounds good, and that's it. Now the centrist bit though, that is serious because it is how I feel. Um, I don't want to talk so much about political scientists' take on this, i.e., how political centrism would be defined from an academic perspective so much, more just how I personally see it and why I identify with it. I may as well say that in the past, I have been politically involved. I was a member of the Liberal Democrat Party in the United Kingdom, which, for my British viewers, you'll know it's our third party, generally speaking, although it's kind of tied with the SNP at the moment for that label. But traditionally, it's been a relatively big party, not on the scale of Labour or the Conservatives, but it's pulled its weight on a few occasions, and it has been part of a coalition government in the Cameron Clegg years. Now, I initially joined the Liberal Democrats under Charles Kennedy's leadership back in 2005. What happened was when I was at university in the Midlands, Wolverhampton, I was approached by the local party, and um, I'm not sure what the context was. If I'd expressed interest or something, I think that's what happened. Anyway, they contacted me, and I just became involved as an activist. I would deliver leaflets. I would help out on in the general election. Even I would be there, in the accounting hall and just things like that. I was active. Then in 2008, local Liberal Democrat approached me to be a council candidate, and I thought about this and I thought, well, okay. Now he did put the caveat that we didn't have much of a chance of winning, but it was important to have a presence. What's so-called paper candidate? It's slightly negative connotation to that, but I thought it would be good political experience, so I done it, and I didn't win. I stood again in 2010, and I tripled my own result, but I didn't win. It's very, very hard to break the mold in a city like Sunderland. But I'm actually on Wikipedia, by the way. If you look up Sunderland council elections, my name and results are there. So Nathan Hazlitt, 2008, 2010. Anyway, I left the Liberal Democrats. Incidentally, they contacted me again yesterday, which is maybe why this is on my mind. Just asked how I was during the pandemic, and they didn't know that I'd been a former candidate. They were just asking that, and I gave them pretty candid, but several feedback on areas that I think needed to improve. One of the problems I think the Liberal Democrats has, and I told the guy this candidly, they're sometimes too negative in their campaigning. There's too much about if it's a Labour seat, just bashing the Labour Party. It needs to be more about selling their own records, their own record. And I actually think the local Liberal Democrats here are good insofar as they do work hard. They will, communicate with people outside election time. I could tell that they work hard. So on a local level, I'd be probably tempted to vote for them. But on a national level, and I again told the guy this, I think the party hasn't stood up for liberal principles anywhere near enough. What I mean by that is when it comes to issues like Islamic extremism, they are basically silent. Of course, they'll condemn a terrorist attack, as will every responsible politician. But I think they should be in the absolute forefront of vocally combating this, what, let's face it, ultimately is an ultimately very neoconservative viewpoint. I mean, neoconservative Islamist viewpoint. I think the Liberal Democrats need to be making bold steps to put human rights before political correctness. I think on too many occasions they've done it the other way around. They're too politically correct. They're too, frankly, woke. Not as much as Labour left, perhaps, but yeah, and it's something I find very off-putting. And I told the guy that. I don't know whether they're going to try and canvass me to stand again. I won't, simply not this time, simply because I'm too busy, and I have other endeavours in life, and being in politics is a serious thing. You need to take it seriously. You need to put time into it. So I just don't think I have that time commitment. Also, I'm not prepared to support the party again, not until I see real signs that they're prepared to, really put liberal values ahead of political correctness. So that's just a bit of background about myself. Now why do I say centrist and not liberal? Well, I'm not against liberalism. I think that classic Western liberalism is a very good thing in many ways. Um, some of the politicians I most admire would be described as liberals, people like David Lloyd George, for example. Um, Not that he didn't have his faults, he did, but he was nevertheless one of our greatest prime ministers. Gladstone, of course, is another towering figure. And looking at American politics, well, the Kennedys are sometimes seen as liberals. That's maybe a misnomer. I'd actually call them more centrists. If you actually look at the Kennedys, I'm talking about the President and Senator Kennedy. That is Bobby Kennedy. Um, Probably what seemed to happen with the Kennedys is with each brother, they got more liberal. So I'd say the president was quite centrist. I'd say Bobby was a little bit more liberal than his brother, and Ted more liberal than Bobby. So, that's kind of they were all their own men as much as they were all Kennedys. But I, I'm a, I have a lot of respect for those guys. I think that they have bold vision. I think that they were realists. Because often when the Kennedy myth, there's a lot of utopianism around it. These guys were realists. They knew that things couldn't happen overnight. I think JFK coined the phrase idealism with realism, or it's attributed to him anyway. And that's a very good thing because it is important to have idealism. It is important to have values, but it's also important to understand how far they can be applied. Now, sometimes the Kennedys were criticised for not going too far enough on civil rights. Could they have done more? Perhaps. But it's important to understand how powerful that Southern caucus was and how powerful those segregationist Southern Democrats were. Of course, it's not an excuse not to take action, but anyway, I digress. I don't want to give a history lesson here. But another British Liberal, incidentally, I have respect for is Sir Henry Campbell Bannerman, who is generally seen as a mediocre prime minister, but actually his administration laid some of the groundwork for the welfare state. It was his administration that brought in the old age pension at the turn of the last century, for example. Um, perhaps Campbell Bannerman deserves a bit more credit. But why do I not say liberal? I think because today liberal very much has a connotation of someone who just wants everyone to be friends. And there's a sort of joke about liberals. It's a fellow with 2 feet planted firmly in the air. I also think that some of the more nutty left-wing ideas often get attributed to liberal thinking. There is a huge difference between liberalism and socialism. Um, and I do get annoyed when American right wingers just conflate the two like they're the same thing. They're absolutely not. In fact, some people that are very outspoken against the regressive left would be self-described classic liberals. Um, Among the American right, liberals is a dirty word. It's kind of seen as, again, there's a bit of ignorance around this. They just conflate it with socialism. They're not the same thing at all. Um, Liberals, for example, are in favour of free markets and open market systems. They're not anti-capitalist. Socialists, however, do look at capitalism with disdain as being a recipe for exploitation and so on. Um, so I certainly would share a lot of liberal principles. Perhaps one of the big things that the reason I don't call myself a liberal is because on certain policy areas, I'm just not that liberal. Crime, I cannot call myself a liberal on crime. And that, perhaps more than anything else, that it's a thing that um, made me sort of disillusioned about being a member of the party because I felt like a hypocrite. I felt I was staying in a party whose crime policies were pretty left wing, pretty similar to Labour. I felt was, I mean, left of Labour, that is. I just felt I was being a hypocrite by continuing to support party in where there was one big policy area that I felt so strongly against. The thing about party politics, and this is worth bearing in mind for anyone who's interested in getting into party politics, it can be very rewarding. You can learn a lot of things, but just be aware that there is a degree of having to toe the party line. There is a degree of having to nail your colours to the mast, so to speak, to use the attribution of local hero Jack Crawford. Um, yeah, so that could be a difficulty with party politics. Of course, parties like to say we're a broad church, we have a broad school of thought, and there may be some truth in that, where there can be internal debates. Of course, there can. That's important. But nevertheless, particularly at cabinet level, when you get up to government level, there's kind of the principle of collective, uh, called now collective responsibility or collective accountability, I think it is. That is to say, say you had a prime minister taking a very controversial decision, all his or her cabinet members would immediately be tied to that, even if they personally disagreed with it. Collective government accountability. And that must be sometimes an uncomfortable position for senior politicians, but they know that's that it comes with the territory. Sometimes in drastic cases, it leads to resignation, like Robin Cook famously resigning over the Iraq War. Um, in which case they put their principles ahead of their perhaps of personal ambitions, and that warrants respect. Respect. Sometimes in politics, just keeping in the theme of politics, a politician can actually get more acclaim being a gracious loser, if I could put it that way, than kind of staying in the game. And there's certain examples of senior, thinking of the United States, for example, of senior politicians who lost in an election, but they later gained a lot of respect. Certainly, John McCain comes to mind. I would say to a lesser extent, Mitt Romney these days. I think Romney is going to be seen as being on the right side of history by speaking out against Trump's attempts to undermine democracy and getting a lot of heat for it from his own side. That does take political courage. They will say, oh, he's siding with the establishment. I would say he's putting his country first, and I think that warrants respect. Um, I give respect to any politician that puts country before party. I think it is quite politically brave to do because you will have the really partisan people in your party saying that you're a sellout, saying that you no longer believe in those values. And that might not be true at all. It might be that you still very much believe in those values, but you find that particular policy direction just isn't the best thing for the country. Now, if I got into politics, I would always, my number one motivation would always be society and the country. But if I did get into politics again and I aligned with a party, it would have to be a party I'm very comfortable with. I think that's extremely important. Anyway, again, I digress, but centrism. I find myself frustrated with the left and the right in roughly equal measures. Roughly equal. In my adult life, I have had periods where I've maybe swayed a little bit more to the right, I've swayed a little bit more to the left. It really does depend on the issue. And someone coming to this channel might home in on a particular video. Say, for example, I'm lambasting Trump. They will immediately assume I'm a left winger. But then I can make another video where I am really laying into woke ideology. Then they would maybe see me as a conservative or a right winger. So I'm quite proud of the fact that I can't be pinned down in that way, that I'm not tied to left or right in that sense. When I'm on in online debate forums, again, I will, if I agree with someone, I agree with them. I try very hard not to tribalize myself. It's sometimes easier said than done. It is. Because of course it's nice to have empathy. It's nice when people, support you, when you support them. It's nice to find that common ground. It's very nice actually. It's motivating. But I try very, very hard to just say what I believe is right. I'm not saying I get into every single debate. Sometimes can't be bothered with it. But I think you have to do that because if you don't, forget about honor and all that sort of thing. It's just a question of practicality. At some point, you're going to get just uncomfortable with yourself if you're always agreeing with people just for the sake of it, because you don't want confrontation. Um, I've said, if I could sort of give out one big misnomer about centrism or misunderstanding about it, it is not sitting on the fence. I think that is perhaps a notion of centrism and centrist people, or in to use the American term, moderates, that they just sit on the fence. The reality is, centrist moderates can actually have very strong views on things. I do. And I can be quite dogmatic on some of these issues. I can be quite stubborn. Um, and some of my positions definitely veer well to one side or the other. So, for example, crime, I'm definitely to the right, and I've no problem admitting that because it's the truth. I am. I'm conservative on it when it comes to crime. I believe that people who hurt society have to pay a price, and I believe that sentencing has to reflect that. I strongly believe that, and I have a lot of criticisms with the current British system. But I'm not so far to the right that I say, oh, just throw them in jail and throw away the key, or don't give them due process, or I'm uneasy with the death penalty, for example. So all of these issues do require significant personal thought. Issues like universal healthcare, I definitely be more to the left. I think that's a good thing. I think it's fundamental human rights. Minimum wage. I'm a strong supporter of the minimum wage because I don't, I can't think of any compelling argument against it other than perhaps for small businesses it is strenuous, and I have some sympathy there. But the idea, I saw this absurd economist video suggesting that the minimum wage hurts workers. Well, that to me that is nonsensical because without the legal minimum wage, an employer can pay as little as they want. So to me, that is rife for exploitation. Just by forget right and wrong, it's just logic here. You know, um, without having a legally guaranteed minimum wage, then workers can easily be exploited. Employees. I don't want to sound like a socialist, but yeah, employees could be easily exploited. Now, actually, I mentioned socialism there. Socialists might say, "Oh, wait, that's a socialist view." Well, I would counter. Do I think that socialism is 100% bad? No, I don't. I think that certain things about socialism, or democratic socialism, perhaps to be more precise, are are commendable. I do think they have a genuine concern about the poorest. I do think they have a genuine concern about issues like exploitation, and those are things I feel concerned about. Where I draw the line is their hostility to capitalism because it's just not reality. Um, Also, I find that socialists are too reluctant to criticize and acknowledge the totalitarianism that's been done in their name. Whenever you point out to a self-described socialist the excesses of Maoism and Stalinism, they will say, "Oh, that's got nothing to do with us." But these were extreme interpretations of, well, communism. But they never called it communism; they called it socialism. So that's why I have a problem with socialism. I think they're dishonest. I also Another big problem I have with the left and this side of the left is I think they're fundamentally divisive when it comes to such issues as race relations. In this area, I think today's British Conservative Party is more progressive actually than some of its opposition parties. When you have a situation where you're pushing critical race theory, that is to say that people of color, ethnic minorities are constantly going to face a situation where they are struggling because of the white majority. What you're doing is fostering a never ending victimhood narrative. And imagine the mental health effect this is going to have on a young black person, where they feel they're in a society that doesn't want them, that they're constantly kept down. I think it's a very, very negative and damaging thing. And importantly, it's extremely dishonest. Um, this is worth a whole video in its own right, but suffice to say, I think it does a lot more harm than good. Um, Affirmative action now in the United States is a bit more complicated because there was actual segregation there. So I can understand why black colleges and so on arose. In Britain, we didn't have as intense we didn't have formal segregation. We had racism, but not formal segregation. So in this country, I think that so-called positive discrimination, again, all it does is treat the applicant like they are a charity case. It doesn't look at them as individuals and it doesn't look at their merit. It looks at them as the black person, the woman, the disabled person who needs to be just given the position because it would be discrimination if they weren't. What I say is create the opportunities for those people, um, but make it open competition. And I do not believe, I will say this just straight out, I do not think that a white straight male should not get a job because he is a white straight male. Now, the woke left will disagree. They will say, oh, they have all the power, so it's okay to discriminate against them, and they wouldn't say it's discrimination. The double standards of the woke left I find infuriating. But I am not comfortable in right wing circles. I don't sort of. This is why I don't go to right wing groups because I find that some other positions also go too far. Like when they get a little bit dogmatic about patriotism, for example, things like that. I um I think that can also be polarizing. Anyway, I could talk all day about the differences in left and right, but these are the aspects of both that put me off. Um, I have to say, when it comes to tolerance, if I had to just come out and say, like as a blanket statement, which side's more tolerant, I would have to say these days, I would have to say in the British context, the right is more tolerant insofar as allowing different opinions. It is unquestionably the woke left that are trying to no platform people. It is the woke left who are trying to cancel people. It is the woke left who are trying to destroy people's livelihoods and reputations. For example, in universities. And there is a sort of extreme self-righteousness with them. If you don't see things exactly their way, especially if you're a white guy, then they're going to they're going to put you in a hole. They're going to say if you don't wholeheartedly support Black Lives Matter, then you must be the enemy. You must therefore be for systemic racism or for white privilege and other very troubling terms. Um, I don't think it's very easy to reason with such people because when you get that sort of dogma, and you get it on the right as well in different ways, but you do get it, it's either their way or the highway. They don't leave any room whatsoever for any sort of, well, let's agree to disagree. It's extremely intolerant. But if it was just an attitude issue, that would be one thing. But what I really, really, really have a problem with the woke left is how they try to bring legislation into it. This is something that anyone who really does believe in liberal democracy needs to be extremely wary of because you might think, oh well, they're not going after me, but one day they will. Um, I think wokeism is sort of cult-like actually, just as cult-like as hardcore Trump supporters. I don't see much difference. I really don't. I don't see much difference between a hardcore Trump supporter calling everything fake news and coming out with a QAnon nonsense, versus a real dedicated woke activist who wants to look for microaggressions and wants to um, find the nearest homophobe or sexist or racist and then destroy them basically. I really don't see much difference. Both are based on extreme dogma. Both are extremely intolerant. They're very honest in themselves. I don't think they're that conviction, but they're intolerant, and it's any reasonable, intelligent adult needs to reject this sort of thing because it's dangerous and it's a threat to reason, and it's a threat to civility. It's a threat to a lot of things. Anyway, I'm at 25 minutes, so I better run this up. I didn't really intend it to be so long, but there you go. It's an interesting subject, and there's a lot to say. So, summed up, I call myself a centrist because I've never been comfortable with the hard left or the hard right, because I have sympathies with both the centre left and the centre right. And when I bring that together, that just seems to be the most honest way I could describe myself. So it's not sitting on the fence. I do have strong views on a lot of things. I'm hawkish when it comes to China. I'm hardline when it comes to crime. But I am also, very insistent that employees need to be treated fairly. I'm dead set against bullying, things that might be more associated with the left. So thanks for watching. If you want to ask me any questions, please feel free to. If you want to clarify anything, or just ask me. I never mind people asking questions. I do mind if they distort my words, but ask questions. Tell me what your own politics are. Whatever. Thanks for watching.